Welcome to the West End Church of Christ. We are conveniently located at 4401 West Broadway. We have ample parking around the building as well as a parking lot that's located adjacent to the building. Our regular order of service is Sunday morning at 10 a.m. we have Bible study. Afterwards at 11 a.m. we have our morning worship. At 5 p.m. on Sundays, we have our Sunday evening worship. We do have midweek Bible study Wednesdays at 7 p.m. and we have classes for all ages.
In order to get to the West End Church of Christ website, you will go to www.westendcoc.com. Once there, you can look for the About that's located at the top of the screen. Hover over it, scroll down to More Bible Talk, click More Bible Talk, scroll down from this screen, and you'll notice an icon which says Gospel 101.9 FM and 1240 AM WLLV. You can click on this graphic or you can click on the hyperlink. Either one will take you to More Bible Talk.
Hey, got a familiar face in the crowd today. one of the members from Oldham Woods popped in today. Good to see you, Tim. All right, open up to the book of Daniel, if you would. No, it's a big surprise. We're back there. So, now I mentioned to hold on to a verse yesterday, and I realized I never got back to that verse. So I wanted to end with something, and I looked at my notes. I was thinking I needed to put that in the lesson because I thought I wasn't in there. Sure enough, it was right there in my notes. I just didn't go to it. So yesterday, as we've gone through and we've talked about God being sovereign over our circumstances, then yesterday we talked about this idea of God when He makes a kingdom and about the decision to either be part of the kingdoms of the world or being a part of the kingdom of God, that choice before us. That's really the two concepts we've talked about the last couple of days. But I mentioned holding on to the end of or chapter 2, verse 11 is the verse that I mentioned. It says, "The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh." Here's the irony, and this kind of sums up what we've talked about here the last couple of days. The issue with Nebuchadnezzar and the wise men is that they think they know everything, right? That's been part of the issue. And here's the irony. Does, as he says, the gods here, those spiritual beings, do they ever have a dwelling with the flesh? The irony in chapter 7 is, what is the picture? The picture is of the Son of Man, a human being that is then worshipped as God at the right hand. And what do we know about the gospel going forward? Is that everything they think is impossible, God actually is able to do. God does become flesh in that Son of Man to then be the ruler and the king that He has set up. And so I wanted to make that point whenever we were talking about that at the end yesterday. But I think that just goes to, again, this whole concept of when God makes a kingdom, it's not going to enter into man's idea. It's not going to be according to his principles, and it will not be just whatever person has the power or the wealth or the wisdom. It's going to be God. It's going to be His chosen one. And that's the one that He's going to put as ruling and reigning. So, what we've been talking about, again, is focusing on the kingdom of heaven versus the kingdoms of men. And we examine what will take place when God makes a kingdom. And so now we're returning back to that concept. Remember, chapter 1, chapter 3, and chapter 6 discuss the faithfulness of God's people. And so we talked about this some on Friday night, and then we'll pick up and talk about that some more today. And so there's enormous pressure that was put on Daniel and his friends by the conforming power and the pleasures of Babylon to deny who they were, to deny their Jewish heritage, their identity, And we're going to return back to that story with a couple of things that we're familiar with. If there's actually really anything you're familiar with in the book of Daniel, it's probably these two stories, the fiery furnace and also Daniel in the lion's den. But before we get into that concept, I want to remind us of some ways that the devil or Satan works and how he's pictured in Scripture. We mentioned yesterday, whenever man is acknowledging God and following his will, he is reflecting and imaging God in the world. Okay? So that word image is actually oftentimes connected to idols because it's a representation of the power of that God. And so you are an image of God in the sense of you're reflecting his glory and his beauty and his goodness into the world. And you're a steward. And yet, what happens when man forgets that? Well, they become like animals, right? That's exactly what we talked about in chapter 7, is they become like these beastly nations, following their passions. Might makes right. It's all of those same ideas. Well, those same type of pictures are introduced to us in the book of Genesis for humanity, but we also have an introduction to our enemy. If you remember in Genesis chapter 3, now I'll get some participation. This is class time, so you can tell me. So in Genesis chapter 3, how is the Satan or the devil presented? Yeah, as a serpent, right? Most cunning out of all the beasts of the field, and everything is about deception, distorting reality, distorting the view of who God is, distorting his word. God did not say, right? Or did God really say is the first question, and then thou shalt not surely die, going directly against his word. But then in the story of Cain and Abel, he talks about sin, and how does he describe sin there? Yeah, crouching at the door. Now, why does an animal crouch? Yeah, it's to hide its power, right? To hide its presence, and then it's preparing to strike, okay? So a very different image, very different than how, I guess you could say a serpent does some of that kind of thing, but it's a very different picture. And so this is built out actually in the New Testament. For example, we'll talk about this, Lord willing, a little bit later with Paul. He describes him as that serpent, right? That deceiving serpent in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. But you remember in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8, he says this about the devil. He says, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Now, with those two ideas in our mind of how the devil works, I want you to think about the lion approach, of where he's very much pursuing in your face, bow down, trying to devour you. And then this serpent approach of being conniving and subtle, like poison, again, that slow taking of the life. We're going to see that in these two chapters. So the first one is going to be in chapter 3 with the lion. And then in chapter 6, we'll see the concept of the serpent. Okay? So let's start with this first one in Daniel chapter 3. In Daniel chapter 3, again, here's the reminder of what I was saying. I did have that chart in there. So we're going to get 4 and 5 here in the middle. That's what we'll do for our sermon hour this morning. So we've got these faithful people that are part of God's kingdom. So let's look at this first concept. This is Daniel 1 through 30. In chapter 3 begins with Nebuchadnezzar doing exactly what we talked about in chapter 2. He uses his wisdom, his wealth, and his power to build what? What does he do? Yeah, a statue, right? I don't know if he had just had this dream and then he wanted to make the dream the reality. I'm not exactly sure why he decided to do this, but how tall was this statue? So 60 cubits. No, we don't measure in cubits. So what do we measure in? What is that today?
90 feet.
Yeah, it's about 90 feet. Okay, there's a little bit of discussion about the cubits there. So he has gone through and taken this and made this image. And again, whenever a king made an image, it was a means of boasting, of pride. I mean, he's not going up there and putting someone else's face. Whose face is on it? It's about him, isn't it? And again, when we talked about Jeremiah 9, again, wisdom, that's skill, right? The ability to do things, to have insight. wealth. This is an enormous amount of wealth. None of us have the amount of wealth. Maybe if we put all of our money together, we might be able to get a little bit of this. But this is a huge statue that's made out of gold, right? And then it's about power. It's about authority. It's about presence. And so he's dedicating this image, in essence, to himself. And he makes a proclamation. And basically what you have multiple times throughout this is there's a great band over here. And every instrument is over here. And whenever the music plays, what are they supposed to do?
Bow down.
Bow down, right? That's actually what the word worship means. It means to prostrate yourself, to give allegiance to. And we see that here in chapter 3. So this is a problem, isn't it? It's a problem for Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, because they were appointed over the affairs of Babylon at Daniel's request. And so somebody read here in verse 8. If someone will read verse 8 down through verse 12.
8 through 12. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and miraculously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up.
Let me make one correction. We don't know for sure that his image was on there. We know that he made the image, right? We don't know that it was necessarily Nebuchadnezzar. But it is connected to what there at the end of verse 12? It is. It's also connected to your gods, right? Remember, we had this whole concept throughout the book of Daniel is there's going to be a battle between these lowercase gods, the idols of the nations. Really, demons are the power behind that. And then the one true God. And so right here in 8 through 12, we have this description here, and they have this malicious accusation. In essence, what do they say about the Jews? What's the problem with them?
They don't pay attention to it.
Yeah. It is interesting what he said. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. I tell you, if you want to get a king on your side, what you do is you just insult him, right? And you're going to see that with Nebuchadnezzar. He just gets angry about this. Then it's they don't serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So they put them in the camp of those strange and disobedient people while also making a jab at Nebuchadnezzar's pride throughout this. And so how does the king respond with that? So he just let it roll off and say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, furious rage. So we've already seen some of that rage already where he would have killed all of his wise men because he was making an irrational request, right? And here we have some of that same idea here. So I want you to think about this as a serious problem for Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. I mean, they're in trouble now. They need to decide what they're going to do. This isn't just kind of, well, you can file an exemption form and you don't have to bow down, or you don't have to show up to work that day or something. There's nothing like that, right? So what are they going to do? And really further, I think what this text is trying to do, or what it presents to us, is it asks us the question, what would you do? What would I do in that situation? Because remember, the command isn't just a slap on the wrist or, 30 days without pay or something, right? I mean, it's to be thrown into the burning fiery furnace. I mean, it's either in or out. And so notice the end of verse 15. It says, this is after, so Nebuchadnezzar is enraged, and then he kind of gets control of himself and brings them in, and basically he's like, let me give you another shot here. So verse 15, now if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? So he gives them this other second shot here. Nebuchadnezzar is being merciful in a sense. And a little bit of sarcasm, obviously. And so this is a person then that is going to make this about loyalty. You're either in or out. You're either with me and my gods and the image I've made, or you're completely out of my sight, is the idea. And so, but notice the question. He says, who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? That really is the fundamental question throughout this, and we're going to see it a little bit later. So this is a test of loyalty, but notice this is all about power and control. That's what people that have, positions like this, that have bought into the worldview of the world, that are all about wisdom and power and might and wealth and those kind of things. It's all about them. And you have to be controlled by them. If you step out of line, guess what? You're gone, right? So this is, again, very much like a lion. Do you see that? This is lion-like aggression in your face. Listen to me. Bow down or you are gone. Okay? So, listen to the answer. Somebody read for us here verses 16 through 18.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up.
All right, thank you. Now he said that they have no need to answer you in this matter. What matter is he talking about?
About what God is going to be able to deliver.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. They're answering the matter about, is there any God who is able to save them? And they're just over there. We have a God that is able to do that. We have a God that has the ability to do that. And it echoes some again of what we've talked about, is that like last time when we looked at chapter 2, you remember in essence they were saying, who has the ability to interpret those dreams? Who has the ability to have that insight? The point is they thought no one did. And it's the same thing. There's no God that's going to be able to do this. And yet here again, the response is, our God whom we serve is able. The exact same type of thing that was said back there in chapter 2. And what's interesting is they go beyond that and say, even if he doesn't, and he has the ability to do that, he may not deliver us in this case, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Again, there's a reason this story is so... There's a reason we tell this to our little kids, right? There's a reason everyone knows about it. Go ahead.
It's kind of a slap in the face. It's a little different if he heard what they said. But it's a more strong denial or slap in his face when you stand face to face and you tell him what you tell him face to face what he's heard. So now you didn't hear it, you heard it from us.
Right.
This is what we're telling you straight on. So that, because I would imagine that's why he made the furnace a lot hotter than it normally is, because now I'm really hot.
Yeah,
I'm really angry now. So.
Oh yeah, it's not just a malicious accusation, like you're saying. He's saying it right to their face. And I'll tell you, so it is interesting because 19, Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury. The expression of his face was changed, and he orders the furnace to be heated 7 times more than it was. That furnace is a representation of Nebuchadnezzar's anger as well. He was angry before. Now it's like really a whole lot worse, right? Going kind of to your point there. So these men are very important because what they're doing here is so important because they have confidence in God's power and they're only going to submit to Him. And it's true, again, even if God does not deliver them. And this is what's so important because sometimes we think, okay, if I have biblical faith, I believe that God is going to give me what I trust in Him to do. That's not biblical faith. Biblical faith is trust regardless of the outcome. is that we trust that God is sovereign and that he will choose to do what he believes is right in the moment. If God had chosen in this moment not to deliver them, that would have been his prerogative. There's a reason that he had that. So God is not obligated to save them, or that they necessarily know that he will, but the point is they're trusting him regardless of the outcome. Okay, that's important. We're not going through, we're not, having a genie with God where, hey, if I rub the right lamp here, then I'm going to be able to get out of the fiery furnace. That's not the idea. We're talking about something different here. We're talking about trusting in God regardless of outcome, and we're seeing how that obviously turns out in a good way here. But it does give us some insight, though, into how people can stand up to tyranny. And now, again, not all of us are right here before Nebuchadnezzar. But the way that they do this is because they are realizing there's someone greater than the threat that is presently in front of them. So to bow down to a lesser power is to be held at fault with the greater. Now the reason that's so important is when you may be on the job site and you have your boss and he's got the lion-like aggression, right? You show up to work or else, right? You're going to lose your job. Or you have a government that's doing the same type of thing. Or maybe it's someone in your own family that says, hey, if you go to that church, you're out of my house, right? Or whatever the case is, it's all of that same type of picture. And so notice, this is the key. When people are trying to act in a tyrannical way, the idea is to understand this person does not have as much power as the one that is on the throne in heaven. And if I bow down to you, then I'm in trouble with the one that's on the throne. Everybody with me? So notice again, he warms it 7 times hotter. It's so hot that it kills these men as they're being put in, and yet the servants of God are completely unaffected. I mean, there's not even the smell of smoke on them, which is an amazing thing. And yet there's a little statement here from King Nebuchadnezzar. Look here at verse 24. Somebody read verse 24 and verse 25.
Verse 24 and 25. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. He answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of God.
Okay, so here, obviously, we have a 4th person, but what do you think is the significance of this 4th person?
Angel.
Yeah, angel. Some people think it's Jesus. We're not going to get into all of that. I can give you my own view on it, but then at least there's some idea there. But what's the significance, though, of the 4th person?
Power of God.
Yeah, the power of God.
They're not alone.
They're not alone. Do you see that? Is that even though they were thrown into the furnace, they were untouched by it. God didn't just keep them from going into the furnace. They went into it. And yet, God went with them in the furnace, right? God went with them in the trial. Remember, that's what we were talking about, is that God is with his people in exile. And that's, again, the message that we're seeing here. And he is able to deliver them. So, again, we can't miss the point of this story, though, and we'll connect this with 1 Peter a little bit later. But do you remember when Peter is talking to the exiles? What does he say about their trials? How does he describe it in 1 Peter 4? He says, do not be surprised at the fiery trial. Do you think he might be having in mind something like this, right? Or, for example, in 1 Peter 1, verses 6 through 9, he describes these trials as a fire, a purifying fire that reveals their faith for the glory of God. And then is it any surprise then? Look here at verse 28. So their faith has been revealed through the fiery trial. And look at what Nebuchadnezzar does. Somebody read here verse 28 and verse 29.
Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this.
Okay, so he describes some of this earlier. So there's no power over the bodies of these men. Their hair is not singed, cloaks not harmed. They have no smell at all. And how does Nebuchadnezzar respond? Yeah, well, we'll see. He hasn't quite got there yet. So, but he's on his way, right? And so he's got his second shot, right? And he is glorifying God, which is the whole point. And would Nebuchadnezzar have glorified God had they caved in their faith? No. They had to go through it. They had to hold to their faith so that ultimately God's purpose and God's mission would be revealed. That's how it comes about. Obviously, God can accomplish His will regardless, right? But that's how we participate in this. And so notice verse 29, what he said. He said that no God, no other God is able to rescue in this way. That's exactly the point. And that's what builds us up and inspires us to have men, to be people like this, despite tyrants and trials, is to know exactly what these people have done. They have not yielded or given their bodies over to serve and worship any God except their own. Their body, their worship is to Him, is to the God of heaven. And so that's what we have to do as well. And through that, it purifies our faith, brings honor and glory to God. Now, let's compare that to a very similar story in chapter 6. So again, another story that we're familiar with. If you fast forward to Daniel 6, we're basically under a new king here. So it's the Medo-Persian Empire. Darius the Mede has been given the kingdom by God. Daniel 5 and verse 31 points that out, which is again what we had seen already, chapter 2, who raises up the kings and who brings them down and who gives the rule. And so Daniel was one of the 3 leaders over the kingdom. And so Daniel was selected for this task despite the regime change, because in verse 3, somebody read here chapter 6 and verse 3.
Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom.
Yeah, now that's an amazing concept. He has an excellent spirit, and he was basically going to be second to Darius over the kingdom there. Now, how did the other leaders respond to that?
Jealousy, probably.
Yeah, they don't go through and say, Daniel's a great worker. Fair and kind and responsible in his work and trustworthy. He's just the kind of leader we need. No, it's the exact opposite of that, right? It's jealousy and spite. And so what they're going to do is they're going to be like that serpent, right? Conniving, manipulating, trying to work circumstances to ultimately have him destroyed. And so the officials start looking for a way to accuse him. But look at verse 5. Somebody read verse 5 for us.
The men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Yeah, so how are they going to have to trip him up?
By using his own faith against him.
Yeah, so this is what's interesting is sometimes, going back to the text in 1 Peter, we're surprised that because we're doing the right thing, we suffer for it, And he says, don't be surprised. And yet there's a reason he says that, because we get surprised about it. And what's interesting is we think because we're faithful, things should go well. Why is he suffering? Because he's faithful. His life will go a whole lot better if he wasn't faithful, right? And this is, again, this goes to a lot of the modern message, this whole, if you're a Christian, your life's going to go better, your finances are going to be better, your health, it's this health and prosperity. Did health and prosperity, was that the message of Daniel? No, it's the exact opposite. It's actually suffering and trial were the message. It's the exact opposite here. And so what we see then is their plan is they're going to have the king pass a law that no man can break that is basically you cannot petition any other god or man except Darius for 30 days. And anyone who breaks that is going to be thrown into the den of lions. So why are they making this law?
To trap Daniel.
Yeah, to trap him.
Because they know he's going to worship his God regardless.
Yeah. Have you ever felt like that as a Christian? That your life has gotten harder, that people have treated you in the wrong way, not because you were doing the wrong things, right? But because you were doing the right things. You're trying to make sure you're an honest person. You're trying to make sure you're doing your job right. You're trying to make sure you're a good father or a good mother or whatever the case is. And people look at that and they're jealous. Or they don't like what you're doing because, I mean, what does light do to darkness? Yeah, it eliminates it. It exposes it. And how does the darkness feel about that? It doesn't like that, right? And so you have that same, again, war that's going on here. So the reason they're doing this is because they know that Daniel prays every single day at a certain time. And they knew they're not going to be able to change that in him. And they know he's going to go forward. So they know his faithfulness. And they expect him to do so after the law is passed. Now, brethren, this is what I want you to see. This is exactly what the devil does. This is how he attacks God's people. Sometimes he's going to present himself in your life as a lion. It says, either bow down to me or get in the fiery furnace. Other times, he's going to go through and be subtle and cunning like a serpent to just try to get you to compromise, or even if you won't compromise, then be destroyed. Now, you'll see this actually as we look through through Daniel's story. So here in verse 10, look at what it says. Somebody read for us verse 10.
Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem. He knelt down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed that and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days.
Okay, so he changed his entire routine to make sure nobody knew. No, he did everything just like it was before, right? And this is what's amazing to me. He opened his window, he kneeled, and he prayed 3 times a day just like he did before. So Daniel's faithfulness is crystal clear. And so Daniel, this is what's amazing. Could he have just closed the window? Could he have just prayed at night? All he has to do is just change his routine and everything's fine, so nobody knows. But what did Jesus say is the point of the light? What do you do with the light?
You don't put it under a bushel.
You don't put it under a bushel, right? You don't put it under a bundle. You don't hide it. Where do you put the light? You put it on a stand so everybody can see it, right? Daniel knows. Daniel knows to do just that little bit right there, to hide his faith, to just cover things up, to just kind of shave off the edges a little bit. That was compromise. And he was not going to give an inch to it. Now, when we look at this, we might ask the question, why is this prayer so significant? Have you ever wondered why is he so serious about this? Even going to the point of the lion's den to pray. Well, I think we need to know what he was praying about, what he was thinking about. So turn to 1 Kings chapter 8 for a minute. Somebody read here 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 46 through 51. Did you know that the Jews, they were predicted that they were going to go into exile? And specifically, Solomon told them what they were supposed to do with their prayers as part of being in exile if they want to come back to Jerusalem. Somebody read here 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 46 through 51. This is when Solomon establishes the temple, and God hears his prayer. And so part of that prayer is where he is praying that God would give compassion on God's people, even though they're taken into captivity. By the way, that compassion that he refers to is the same one in chapter 2 and verse 8. You know, whenever he asks his friends for compassion, he says, pray that we could have compassion. Well, we're not going to get wiped out with the rest of the wise men. That's the same word that's referred to here in this text. So in 1 Kings chapter 8 here, verses 46 through 51. Somebody read that for us.
1 Kings chapter 8, 46 through 51. If they sin against you, For there is no one who does not sin. And you are angry with them and give them to an enemy, so that they are carried away captive to the land of the enemy, who often are near. Yet, if they turn their heart in the land to which they have been carried captive, and repent and plead with you in the land of their captors, saying, we have sinned and have acted perversely and wickedly. If they repent with all their heart, with all their soul, in the land of their enemies who carried them captive, and pray to you toward their land, which you gave to their fathers, the city that you have chosen, and the house that I have built for your name. Then hear in the heavens your dwelling place, their prayer and their plea, and maintain their cause. And forgive your people who have sinned against you and all their transgressions that they have committed against you, and grant them compassion in the sight of those who carry them captive, that they may have compassion on them. For they are your people and your heritage, which you brought out of Egypt from the midst of the iron furnace. Let your eyes be open to the plea of our servant and to the plea of your people, Israel, giving ear to them whenever they call to you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so what are they supposed to do when they're in exile?
Pray for their captives.
Yeah, they're supposed to pray, and where are they supposed to pray toward? Toward Jerusalem. Why is he opening that window every day?
Pray.
Where's he looking? He's looking toward Jerusalem, right? He's praying because he's thinking about that captivity. And so stopping that prayer would be a terrible thing, because that prayer is about having the compassion that he needs, right? And it is Daniel saying it. He needs to be helped. He needs to be saved. And so Daniel here is not trusting in himself to be saved. He's trusting in God to be saved. And that prayer is all about that. And so then the officials, you know the rest of the story, going back to Daniel, they see Daniel praying, and they go to the king. They bring up Daniel, and then notice the line. This is in verse 13. It says, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you. You see that again? Same thing. Again, throwing them in the camp of the strange, the foreigner, and then making this kind of jab at the king's pride there. Now, what's interesting is he doesn't respond with anger. In fact, this king is deeply distressed. He is going to have the compassion that God is wanting to give. He tries and tries to save Daniel, but is unable to do so. But notice the text highlights the same point as back there in chapter 3. So going down a little bit later, it says right here in, let me find it real quick. So this is what the king says as he's been trying to save him. Somebody read here verse 16 down through verse 18. Daniel 6.
Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. Laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him.
Okay, so what did he say about the delivering concept?
God will deliver.
Yeah, he said, may your God whom you serve continually deliver you. He knew exactly. This is a king that had been influenced by this faithful Jew and his confidence, and said, look who has the power. This is the only God that has the ability to deliver something like this, and now you have a king that believes it. And so he calls on that. And so the mouth of the den is sealed with a stone, the king's seal. The king is anxious all night, and then at morning he comes and notices his words. Verse 20. So verse 20 here says, as he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? And what does he say in verse 20, verse 21, and verse 22?
Then And Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth.
Yeah, so God is more than able, right? And it's because Daniel was blameless, because he trusted in his God. Verse 23 is the point he makes there. And so this is a message again to the exiles to be faithful to the Lord and put their trust in him so that he will save. So what do you think is the point of these two chapters? It is that God can deliver, and only Yahweh can do this. No man or power. And who will deliver? Who will he deliver? It is those that put their trust in him. So let's talk briefly then about the message for us out of these texts. As I mentioned, 1 Peter chapter 4. Do not be surprised about the fiery trial. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 through 9. Again, these fiery trials that test their faith. So we have this question then for us. Have I got 5 minutes? I'm supposed to cut right now? Oh, okay, well. All right, well, let's go through this quickly then. So the question we might ask is, how can I know that God will deliver me like he delivered his friends? And what does faithfulness to God look like today? And I believe this is actually answered in the imagery that is brought up here. Did you know the comparisons that are brought up to Jesus and his death in this? For example, the officials conspired against Daniel. Did you know that the high priest and the elders conspired against Jesus to kill him? In the second thing, this is not my original list. So the conspirators, they found no corruption in Daniel. Guess what they didn't find in Jesus either? No corruption. So Daniel was convicted by trickery and deception. What about Jesus? Same thing, right? So they were also found guilty of transgressing the law, even though neither of them had actually broken the law, right? So Darius was unsuccessful to try to save Daniel, and Pilate was unsuccessful to try to save Jesus. Then Daniel trusted in God for deliverance. Guess who Jesus trusted in? Same thing, right? And so as well, where was Daniel placed? In the pit, right? Did you know the pit is a common picture of the grave in the Old Testament? Guess where Jesus was put? Put in the tomb, right? And so Daniel's pit was covered with a stone. What did they cover Jesus' tomb with? A roll of stone, right? What did they do with sealing it? King put a seal, right? That's what Pilate did. Same thing there with Jesus. Then early in the morning, the king comes out and to find that Daniel is alive and he's taken up out of the den. What did they find with Jesus? When did they come? Early in the morning. There it is. Same thing. And then after being taken up, Daniel continued to rule and prosper in the kingdom. And guess what happened with Jesus after he was raised? He ruled and reigned. Same thing. And let me just add you one more thing. At the end of both of these, there's a proclamation of good news. Either listen to this one or there's going to be consequences, right? So what we then see is in all of these stories, the story of Daniel here is pointing to the story of Jesus. Same God that delivered Daniel delivered Jesus. And what he has done is he has actually saved us through his death from our fiery furnace, right? Matthew chapter 13 has that same type of picture. We're out of time here, but the point is, what Jesus has done, what God has done for Jesus is the hope and the trust that he will do that same thing for each of us. And that's what the good news is. That's what the gospel is about, is that God has done something in Jesus that is going to be given to us as well. So what does faithfulness look like? So Satan is still up to his same tricks, brethren, preaching different gospels, giving different spirits in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, have false teaching and deception. But notice as well, the devil is like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour, like we see in 1 Peter 5. And I'll tell you, we won't read this text, but read chapter 5, verses 6 through 11, and you will see what our responsibility is. It is to be humble, to cast our anxiety on God, to be sober and watchful, to resist him and be firm in our faith, knowing that we are not alone, and we will ultimately receive that eternal glory. I apologize for my time management on that. But that's in essence the point. And so the choice is, who are we going to be? Are we going to be like Daniel and Hananiah and Azariah and Mishael? Are we going to be among those that compromise and ultimately are not going to be rescued by the Lord? Okay, we'll stop right there. And I should have talked with Melvin about where I was supposed to stop. So, all right, we'll stop right there and we'll continue our series in Daniel 4 and 5 here in just a minute.
Amen.